Raise your fists together. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Red and yellow, brown, black, and white. We're all precious in God's sight. Everybody, somebody. Stop the violence. Save the children. Stop bullying. Save the children.
Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us at today's Saturday morning forum here at Rainbow Push Coalition headquarters. As we convene under the compelling theme, Price of Free Speech, Freedom is Never Free, our discussion today takes on an added urgency in light of recent global events. Today's forum comes at a critical juncture as we witness both Israeli and Palestinian communities actively calling for a ceasefire. These calls have resonated into student-led protests on our university and college campuses throughout this country, in fact, throughout the world. These young voices, diverse in their backgrounds yet united in their call for peace, remind us of the powerful role that free speech plays in our society. As we explore the complexities of the First Amendment rights today, we will pay special attention to how these rights empower students to organize, protest, and speak out against conflicts like the war in Gaza. Today, we will discuss the motivation behind these protests, the responses they have elicited, and the broader implications for free speech and activism in our educational institutions. Let us proceed with open minds and empathetic hearts. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to the idea that freedom is not passively received, but actively engaged. As we discuss, debate, and learn, let us also remember the sacrifices made in the pursuit of freedom and peace, reflecting on how we must sometimes reach out, speak up, and take action to uphold our cherished freedoms. I have joining me today Kevin Fee, Esquire, who is Senior Special Litigation Counsel for the ACLU of Illinois. Please welcome Kevin. Kevin, one thing that is so pure and so basic in our Constitution is the First Amendment. Talk about what the protections are afforded in the First Amendment Act.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me today. And you're right, the First Amendment, I always say is first for a reason, right? It's probably the most foundational of our rights, and it covers a number of things. It covers the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, establishment of religion, free exercise of religion. But for today's purposes, and in light of the Gaza protests happening just down the street and around the country, I think the sort of most important thing to talk about is what it does to restrict government's ability to control people's speech. So distilled down to its kind of most basic level, the First Amendment prevents government from restricting speech based on its content. So there's a few different elements there. First, it's the government, right? It restricts the government, not all actors, not private actors. And it restricts their ability to restrict speech based on content, not, writ large. So basically what it says is that the government can't tell you what you can and can't say.
That's pretty basic and pretty simple. Can't tell you what you can or can't say. How do these, when we look at things that are happening now, and particularly when we think about what's happening on college campuses, which is the focus of today, how do these rights, in fact, play out in practice?
So, the First Amendment, and especially the speech clause that I just mentioned, is really about ideas, right, when it comes right down to it. And universities are the incubators of the ideas that shape society, right? It's the place where ideas are born and formed and debated. And so, inevitably, you're going to have an intersection between the mission of a university and the First Amendment. It's essential that, free speech free exchange of ideas, freedom of inquiry be respected. Otherwise, the university can't do what it does. So the way that plays out, especially in times like this, in times of protest, is you have varying parties expressing ideas that they feel really, really strongly about on both sides, employing a range of different tactics and messaging techniques, all vying for space, right? And sometimes the tactics can include physical tactics that are not speech, violence and vandalism, things like that. And so universities are really called upon to draw these really difficult lines between these different areas and figure out kind of where the First Amendment applies and where it doesn't. One thing I do want to mention is that makes this especially complicated is that what I mentioned right at the beginning about the First Amendment restricting the government and not private actors is really important in the protest movement because we've got both public and private universities experiencing these protests. And the First Amendment operates very differently in those two spheres.
Explain, please, because that was exactly where I was going next. We do see it happening on some private university campuses. What is the difference?
So public universities are much more, are restricted by the First Amendment. Essentially, the simplest answer is that the First Amendment restricts public universities' ability to control speech in ways that it does not restrict private universities. So private universities, being private actors, are not subject to this First Amendment's restrictions. Now, that's not to say that private universities are or should be allowed to do anything and everything to restrict speech, but they're just not, they're not constitutionally prohibited from doing so.
Okay, just add some more clarity to that, because when we say first we talk about the freedoms that the First Amendment gives, but then you talk about the restrictions of the First Amendment in certain places. So when we think about a public institution has more rights, more freedoms than you do on a private institution?
The speakers in the public institution have more rights, essentially, under the First Amendment. So speakers at public universities have the right to protest that's explicitly protected by the First Amendment because the government, or the university as a government actor, is not allowed to restrict their speech. When the university is a private actor, it does, under the Constitution, have more ability to restrict speech. So unfortunately, students on private university campuses don't quite have the same level of speech protection as public university students do.
Okay, so in a public university, free speech is not absolute. So you can't yell in a fire in a crowded theater. You can't cause harm to other people. But on a public university campus, you can pretty much say and do what you want, without those restrictions. When you get to a private institution, and we think about locally, an institution like, the University of Chicago, Northwestern, DePaul, all of which have currently demonstrations going on. There are limits to what students can say and limits to what can be said on those campuses because they are private institutions.
Yes, there's certainly limits to what the students can say because their speech is not protected by the First Amendment in the same way. Now, they are protected by the governing principles of those universities, which are explicitly devoted to the free exchange of ideas, and their own internal policies and missions should guide them in a way that's really parallel to the First Amendment. But to put it bluntly, it's not as easy to come in and file a lawsuit against a university for restricting speech in the private setting as it is in the public setting.
So the students at, Northwestern or DePaul or University of Chicago, at USC, are not allowed to do what?
Well, it's more a question of what the university is allowed to do and not do, I would say. So the university has more freedom to restrict speech on a private campus than a public university does. A private university has much more power under the law to do that. Now, it's still, though, I want to make sure to emphasize that the university's missions, their private policies, And really their guiding principles should restrict them in the same way that the First Amendment does. But, you know, legally speaking, they are allowed to do more to shut speech down.
So when we look at the campuses, and in some places students have been, the protests have been going on without much interference from the university. That's not the case every place. When we think about what's taking place at Columbia University, a private institution, when we think about how the authorities then came in there and began to dismantle the encampments, why do they have the ability to do that there? And why would that happen there and not happen at some of the other places where these encampments are being held?
Well, part of the reason is that they're private institutions. The other reason is that there are some exceptions to the way that the First Amendment applies. And so the First Amendment applies to the content of speech. You can't tell somebody as a government entity what they can and can't say. You can't say, I like this idea, but I don't like this one, so this person has to be quiet. This person is allowed to speak. That they cannot do. It does allow what they call time, place, and manner restrictions, even at a public university. So at a public university, there is the ability to say, you can speak, but you're not allowed to say, take over a building, or block traffic, or use sound that's so loud that people can't hear their professors teach. So, you know, those time, place, and manner restrictions are allowed at all universities, but, you know, our position as an organization is always that they should be applied in a way that leaves ample space for students to protest, to have their voices heard, whether it's a public or a private university.
So I'm guessing that there's not a university that you're allowed to take over a building, whether it's public or private. But I'm also going to say that in a protest, you don't do what's allowed, you do what makes people uncomfortable, because the idea is to get your attention. And so when we start to see these things happen, where is it that, and I will also point out the fact that at private institutions, you're paying more. They're more selective in who comes in, you're paying more to come in, and very likely the students expect more freedoms than it seems that they are getting, and these things only come to the front in moments like this, when you decide to have a protest about whatever the issue is, and then the university steps forward and says that you can't. That seems to be a hypocrisy in the First Amendment.
Yeah, the First Amendment is, you know, unfortunately limited in what it allows students, especially in the private sphere. But, you know, there's a big difference that I think folks need to think about between what is legally permitted and what is wise, right? And what is the right thing to do in a university environment. And just because you have the legal right to restrict speech on a university campus doesn't mean that you should, right? You can always call in the police at the first, you know, breach of a university policy. But is that consistent with a university's mission? I would say absolutely not. So I think the key thing that should be guiding universities in this tumultuous time is restraint and creating space for people to make their voices heard, because these are important issues and we need to hear from the youth, and they have something to say to society, and they should be allowed to say it, whether they're at Columbia, NYU, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, or otherwise.
Sounds like a good idea. So let's hear from some youth at the University of Chicago about exactly that, about the student protest over the war in Gaza. We'll do that right after this.
Push Excel strives to be a world leader in promoting educational excellence and equity so that every child is guaranteed an opportunity to receive a quality education. We've awarded more than $10 million in scholarships year to date. And you can help young people achieve a higher education by donating to Push Excel right now. Wherever you are, you can support our students as we keep pushing for you.
Attention high school seniors and college freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. If you are in need of financial assistance, Push for Excellence offers a variety of scholarships for which you may be eligible to apply. Whether it's the Jesse Jackson Fellows Toyota Scholarship, the Cirillo McSween New York Life Scholarship, or the Oralee Sanger Scholarship, Push for Excellence strives to offer something for everyone. Here are just a few of our scholarship recipients.
Hello everyone viewing, my name is Chidi Osakwe.
Dominique Davis.
Julian Jones.
China Mazum.
Miles Cherubin.
Jalen Clark.
Marcus Anderson.
Jaden Reed.
Kara Young.
It's Megan Chu, and I'm a Cirillo McSween Scholar.
I want to take this opportunity to thank Reverend Jesse Jackson for all his support of my college education.
Thank you for all of Toyota for helping with Reverend Jackson with the scholarship as well.
I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to Reverend Jesse Jackson for helping to make the scholarship opportunity possible for me.
As appreciative as I was before, I'm even more grateful now having received this scholarship.
Not only has it helped me out financially with paying for tuition, but it has also awarded me the opportunity to learn more about the Rainbow Push Coalition and their different initiatives in the African American community.
I'd like to say thank you to Reverend Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Push Coalition for all the generosity and support that they've shown me throughout my undergraduate career and for the opportunity to pursue higher education.
For more information, please visit our website at www.pushexcel.org and click on the word scholarships. Thank you, and keep hope alive.
Welcome back. First Amendment freedoms and student protests on campus over the war in Gaza. We've been joined, along with Kevin, now by Congressman Jackson, and a student from the University of Chicago, Taylor Pate. Taylor, before I go to you, let me ask you, Congressman, what has been your sense about what's taking place on these campuses around the country?
Well, I am very proud of this generation of young people that are now taking to the halls of academia. I think they're expressing the highest and best ideals of America, the right to have the ability to protest and to do so in peace. There's a war ongoing, and we see a civilian population where the death toll is mounting. We're seeing starvation being used as a tool. It's against U.S. federal foreign assistance law, 620I, that we cannot supply foreign assistance at the same time be restricted from giving humanitarian aid. So that's illegal. So they're really challenging the government to do what is right by our own books. So I'm very proud of these young people on taking that to the streets. And I think that there was a heightened trigger that took place most recently. And it's going in the wrong direction when the professors of Harvard, MIT, and University of Pennsylvania were called down, and then the language of protecting the campus, which was beginning to use to weaponize the word of anti-Semitism, and they fired some major donors, had the president of Harvard fired, and then they challenged University of Pennsylvania and MIT. And I think what happened in Columbia is that the president was put in a very awkward position, and a major donor was threatening to withhold funds, and they were asked to call the police in. And so she jumped the gun and called the police and had those children arrested, those young students. Please forgive me. I say children because not everyone on campus is the age of my children, so I respect you as an adult, and they're more than half my age. So they went into action. And if it could happen at Columbia University, the young students realized it can happen at Yale, so they hit to the streets, at Princeton, at Harvard, at University of Chicago, at Northwestern, Emory. 100 campuses are now having these demonstrations at USC, UCLA. And by the way, I started doing the research on it, and I could not find the history of one protest in the University of Chicago's entire history. All you can do at University of Chicago is study and try to get out. So it's a very prestigious university that has the most Nobel laureates of any university in the country. But the children are sensing that they don't want this war to go on and this famine and this food to be weaponized in their name. And I applaud the young Jewish students that are leading so many of these marches. And so they've been peaceful, but now the government is stepping in with a very heavy hand, and some donors are asking that these children be violently removed, and the students are speaking up.
Well, let's talk about what happens on these campuses with students here. I recall when I was in college down at Southern University, a great man came through, everybody filled up the stadium. He stood there with this beautiful afro telling us, "I am somebody." And we were all wrapped in what he was saying and felt empowered in that moment because we were there to learn, but we were also there demonstrating whenever the cause called for it. So here we are today, and we have a student with us this morning, Taylor Pate from the University of Chicago. Taylor, welcome to Rainbow Push Saturday Morning Forum. Why don't you tell us just a bit about yourself and how this movement impacts you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Taylor Pate. I am a second-year undergraduate at the University of Chicago. I actually hail from the South Side. I'm from Auburn Gresham, and I currently organize with SJP, which is Students for Justice in Palestine, at the Chicago chapter, and I also organize with our organization Care Not Cops, which focuses on just acknowledging the impact that the police presence has on the campus as well as the community. But personally, I organize just because the history that being both Black and Indigenous, the history of genocide, especially in America, I don't feel right just sitting here not doing anything about what we're seeing now, because I can't be part of history where I'm watching what happened to my own people happen to other people and just remain silent. So.
Reverend, I don't want to miss the moment that we have a student here from Auburn Gresham who's going to the University of Chicago. That's no small feat. So there are a number of things in what you said, and certainly a number of things in your experience, because we do understand where you've come from, to be there and to think about these protests. What was it that you see as the trigger that brought students and their engagement, involvement in this protest?
Yeah, so in real time, we're watching a genocide unfold. It's been over 40,000 martyrs, over half of them being women and children. And also, basically all the universities in Gaza have been destroyed, and almost all the hospitals have been destroyed. So that's our main trigger. But not only that, you Chicago students, our taxes, and as well as the Hyde Park community members' taxes and tuition dollars have been going into the funding of these deaths in Gaza, and a lot of us actually being students who are being paid to be there on scholarship, but as well as students who pay full tuition. We can't stand the idea of having our money and having our efforts being a part of the deaths in Gaza. This is kind of how we formed our demands. Well, our first being acknowledging the scholasticide with all the universities being destroyed. With that, actually, our president of the university, Paul Abasados, actually denied the destruction of these universities despite it being well documented. I just want to note that. But with that, we have our three demands, which is divesting from the deaths in Gaza, as well as divesting from the South Side, and also disclosing where their investments and funding are going, because there has been, as we have noted, they're a part of the funding of the genocide, and we would just prefer them, or we would want to have them adhere to a justice-based guideline with where their money is going. And we also want them to repair the damage that has done to not only the Palestinians, but also the South Side. We want them to support specifically the Birzeit University's initiative to rebuild Gaza's higher education, and also putting funding into the South Side. I'm not sure if anybody has seen it, but UChicago had promised to fund the Southside Violence Prevention Program and promised to provide $15 million. However, they failed to do so, only providing under $3 million. So we've continuously seen the university make these promises and not make promises to not only help the South Side, but also they've been pretty much silent in regards to the issues with Palestine, despite speaking on the Russia-Ukrainian war, as well as Trump's Muslim ban.
So you all listed everything. You've got a cornucopia of all these issues that take place at the University of Chicago. What I heard you say clearly, I think, is that the president of the university did not acknowledge that universities in Gaza had been destroyed and what has taken place there. Let me ask you, Congressman, when we think about that fact, give us some perspective on this whole thing, because at some level it elevated on the 7th of October. It began a lot longer than that. This issue has been going on a lot longer than that. But even if we stop and put a pin down at October 7th, talk about what's happened from that point forward that leads Taylor and her colleagues around the world to step forward as they have.
Well, let me just say, Mrs. Taylor, congratulations. This young lady is so sharp, and this is, she's very symbolic of this generation, so I applaud you. You know a lot more than I did at your age. And they're courageous. They're putting their names out there. The advent of this cell phone now has really been transformed. We saw a little bit of it coming this way with the funding of Howard Dean's election and then the ability to voice video data. Now people have an alternative means to transmit information. So these young people are learning in real time. They can track our votes in the Congress. They see what the U.S. law is. They can walk to the campus, to the cafeteria, research U.S. law. It's illegal what we're doing. We cannot fund a state. We cannot give our military assistance to a country at the same time that is denying humanitarian access. It's illegal. It does not take us 2 months to build a ramp to deliver meals inside of Gaza. But by the time we passed that bill 2 weeks ago that I opposed, voted against, proud to do that representing the 1st Congressional District, not only politically, morally, ethically, it's just simply wrong. Now we're going to manufacture, deliver, ship missiles back to Mr. Netanyahu's hands before we get more meals delivered to Gaza. Everything about that is absolutely wrong. It makes us a hypocrite in the world's eyes. We have to keep in mind October 7th was horrible. It was dreadful. It was so unnecessary. It was god-awful. We condemn that violence that happened on October 7th. But when clearer heads prevail, we have to talk about October 6th. There were 200 people in the West Bank that have been killed to date of this year, that last year, that had not been recognized. This has been an ongoing, seething, simmering feud that's happened. Hamas is roughly 16 years old. Mr. Netanyahu's been in power almost 16 years. He enabled, empowered, he developed Hamas so that he would have no clear alternative to talk to. And he kept on saying, I have nobody to talk to. I can't deal with the PLO. I can't deal with Hamas. I was in Israel with the AIPAC organization to go on a fact-finding mission. I reserved the right to continue to talk with everyone. I went over there with them. I was not influenced by any of their donations or funding. I was not seeking it. I want to hear it from their perspective. I've been supported by J Street, an alternative to AIPAC. I went from there, saw the Holy Land, went to Rwanda, and came back and still voted against them. I was on the first round of a ceasefire. Because when we had a private meeting with Mr. Netanyahu, I said at the issue at that time was reciprocal visa waiver rights. Essentially saying, and Condoleezza Rice and other people signed off on this, if you have an American passport and you want to have the reciprocal visa waiver program, United States Department program, you recognize our visa, we recognize yours. The problem I had is that my constituents that are Palestinian here in the Chicagoland area would take their blue passport and would have to be cordoned off, put in a separate line, and be treated differently. That's not what the State Department program says. And Mr. Netanyahu would not answer the question. He deflected. I remind you, the original sin is blame shifting. Adam, why did you eat this? Well, she made me do it. No, you did that on your own. Stop blame shifting. So I saw him as a blame shifter. So I would not trust him, and he's not been trustworthy since then. And I think it's very clear that we have to separate the two. We're not against the Jewish state. We're not against the Jewish people. I'm against the leadership of Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu. He has been behind this problem all along, and good and reasonable people understand that, and they need to have the courage to speak up and speak back to him. He is the problem. He's never sought a two-state solution. He is a warmonger, and now he is disrespecting the President of the United States, and we need to stand up and let him know we stand for doing what is right, and he will not influence our elections.
Yeah, that's important to point out, and thank you so much for that. Before we break for this section, I do need to ask Kevin a question, because you heard all the demands that Taylor made on behalf of the students. Where is it that the university can stop where they are based on what it is that they're asking for? Are they free in what they're in their positions?
Well, the university is free to do whatever it wants and to accept any of the demands of the students. Frankly, the First Amendment doesn't, and the law doesn't prevent them from doing that. The students have made their voices heard. The university has so far, I think, exercised admirable restraint in allowing them to protest. I hope they continue to do that, to avoid escalation and avoid violence, and avoid bringing in, armed police when it's not necessary. And I urge them to listen to the students. I mean, you see that there was an agreement reached between the students protesting at Northwestern and the administration. This is an issue that can be solved.
Taylor, do you believe that they heard your voices? Has the university heard the students?
Well, in the past, there has been a bit of repression. As you know, or as you may not know, the university really emphasizes the idea of free speech, but they also have very arbitrary rules about free speech. They follow the Calvin Report, and they discuss neutrality, and like I mentioned earlier, they've spoken about Russia and Ukraine and the Muslim ban. So often we've asked to meet with Paul in the past, and that was denied. We are currently in communications. However, I can't disclose everything, but at a certain point, they can't not hear us. And I think this is with encampment, the point we're trying to make is that you can't ignore what's going on, and they're not ignoring it now, and I'm glad to say that we are being heard. To what extent, but yeah, we are being heard. We are being listened to, yes.
Thank you. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Let's talk about some perspectives on Zionism, what that is, what that means, and where we go from here right after this.
We're excited to get more people involved in Rainbow Push, supporting the programs of Push for Excellence and the Citizenship Education Fund. If you're interested in impacting public policies, if you believe in the scholarships that we give to thousands of students each and every year, you can become a policymaker by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now. For an annual membership of $35, or if you're a student or senior, $15, you can help us make a difference in the lives of millions. How do you become a member? Visit our website at rainbowpush.org and press join. Or maybe you'd like to support us. You can text the word PUSH, that's PUSH, to 41444 on your cell phone, and you can give any amount you feel comfortable giving. You can also call us at 773-256-2775, or go to rainbowpush.org and push donate. Wherever you are, you can support us as we keep pushing for you.
Welcome back. We've covered quite a few things, and I should have asked earlier, but our University of Chicago student, Taylor Pay. Taylor, where'd you go to high school?
I went to Chicago High School for Agricultural Sciences.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is Chicago Public Schools. So for those who don't think it gets done in our public schools, this is proof otherwise. We have joining us Cameron Barnes, who's our National Youth Director from Rainbow Push. Cameron, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, of course.
So good to have you. Give your thoughts on what's happening with our youth, what's happening in this movement, what's happening with young people.
Well, I must also commend the students across the country. As it's been stated, more than 100 universities from the West Coast to the East Coast, from the North to the South, are participating in many different forms of demonstrations because, again, what young people are now calling this one of the greatest war crimes of modern American history. And we are likening this unto really an apartheid, and that's what's being used in the media. And I remember hearing all about the South African apartheid, being around Rainbow Push now for about 10 years, and all of the different things that went along with that. I never lived that, though. I could only hear those stories. And it's now the fact that we are living in our own modern day apartheid, if you will. And students are responding as students have always responded in the movement. No movement has gone on without young people. The conscience of the Congress, the late Congressman John Lewis got his start as a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC as it was called. So I see students doing what students have done throughout the corridors of history. We're proud to stand with them in the sense that this is just not something that is spur of the moment, that is ill-informed. These are very informed, as Taylor has already shown us. These are very informed students that are not demonstrating just for the heck of demonstrating, but there is a true and genuine cause behind it.
Indeed. I actually, on my show yesterday, Bakari Sellers was there, and his dad was one of the founders of SNCC. So thinking about how that continues on generation from generation, and the importance of it, and the need to continue to recognize young people's voices just becomes so prominent so often. And it tells us if we don't hear their voices, it means we're not doing our jobs because we haven't taught them in doing so. Congressman, talk a bit, you talked about your meetings with Netanyahu. Talk a bit more about Zionism and where the stances are on Zionism from the river to the sea.
Well, just in general, on the religious point of view, of course, there's Mount Zion, the city of David, all the good historical facts there, but Zionism, the spirit, was basically the refuge to create a Jewish state starting in the late 1890s in Europe, where they were experiencing anti-Semitism, and the political idea was a political idea to establish a resettlement, a homeland for the Jewish community. And after anti-Semitism was expressed and hatred towards Jews that came out of Europe, that was the Germans, that was the Spaniards, that was the British, that was the French. The hatred against the ethnicity came out of Europe, and then they decided to resettle that community back into what was reclassified as the homeland. Now, that was a political decision. We cannot say we're going to resettle the United States with Native Americans in Manhattan with a bunch of beads. We can't say we're going to resettle Native Americans in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa. Illinois has no recognized Native American tribe, and yet the state is named after them. Chicago is named after them. So it was reestablished that they would carve this land out and people would live together. Now, there are Arab Muslims and there are Arab Jews. To be a Semite means to come from that region, both Arab and Jewish. And let us be clear, what they've done in this last round of language from I believe that's Bill 6020 that was passed on last Friday that I disagreed with, is now you're harboring, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others oppose that same language, because now you can't even question Jewish history and Jesus to certain points. Now, the language has become extreme on what the debate is we can even have within religious corridors about Jesus. Jesus, I'm reminded by my father, was a Palestinian Jewish person. There were no Christians in Jesus' time. Christianity starts after Jesus is dead. So Jesus was Jewish. So we have profound belief and respect for the Jewish faith, but we're talking about the act of Mr. Netanyahu leading a state that has never tried to have a peaceful settlement. So Zionism came out of a political movement to establish a homeland for people that had been killed and under horrific circumstances, two separate things.
And so here we are now, and Taylor, I want to come back to you and just think about, or share with us from the ground, what is it like on the college campus right now? What is it like at the University of Chicago? And given the list of demands that you share with us, where does this issue of Zionism, Gaza, disinvestment, how do those conversations square with what's happening there on campus?
Yeah, so we do have not a large Zionist presence, but we have organizations like Maroons for Israel. However, just yesterday, we did have a counter-protest from fraternity brothers on our campus. However, what was interesting was that the counter-protests include waving American flags, which we all found interesting, that they're counter-protesting a pro-Palestinian encampment with American flags. But with that, most of the Zionist population on our campus is not as vocal, and that was just, I don't know, that was a very special circumstance, I will say. But in regards to the university's investments, they invest in and have relationships with the Israeli Institute, and they have Paul, our president, had just recently met, I believe it's about a month or so ago, he met with the Israeli Institute consulate. Yeah, that's, in terms of asking for divestment, one of our biggest pushes is requesting for them to divest and break these ties with the Israeli Institute.
So that is the demand that seems to be one that's consistent throughout the country. Yes. This issue of divestment. I stopped by DePaul's campus a couple days ago, listened to some of the speeches, saw some of the signs, saw young sisters out there with Black Lives Matter and divest, and listened to some of those things that happened there. Cameron, talk about what Rainbow Push can do in helping to support these demonstrations on campuses around the country.
Well, the first thing, I want us to be able to continue having these kinds of conversations because as we mentioned in the first half of this show, this freedom of speech, this freedom of press, this information, Rainbow Push can and will be and has always been a vehicle for information. This is where we have educated, and it's not just Black people, but a rainbow coalition. We certainly can do even more work with you joining our organization because these kinds of conversations don't happen without you. Rainbow Push does not happen without you. So we certainly want you to join the organization and support the organization, be in the room on the Saturday morning forum, and of course following us doing the things that we do. But a lot of the things that we do and Reverend Jackson has done and all of our leadership is we go beyond just the four walls of our headquarters. We also would like to go, and Reverend Jackson even this week has visited some encampments to see what the air is on the ground. We cannot gauge the temperature from this room all the time. So Rainbow Push goes out. We are a global organization with members and chapters, of course, all across this entire nation. And so what we can continue to do is, of course, being a mecca for information, but also being a hub for coalition building, to build the coalition between our Palestinian American brothers and sisters, our Jewish American brothers and sisters, and becoming a solution-based organization to have these conversations, these demonstrations, these experiences that allow people to communicate effectively and get to a solution.
Congressman, let me ask you, because in all of these cases, anyone who has a student who's in college right now is, one, proud that their students are in college, but concerned about their safety, particularly when these kind of things happen. What can be done from your perspective, from a governmental standpoint, to ensure parents that their children are doing what children should do, what students should do, but to particularly ensure their safety?
Well, we stand by denouncing all forms of hate speech, and no Jewish child should ever feel threatened on campus. We believe in campus security for all children. This is very focused on the Jewish population. There should be a hotline number. It should be dealt with. The chancellor should be able to have constant meetings, engage them, that fear is something that we have to understand and have to deal with. So I'm 100% in support of that. Before this legislation came out of our Democratic caucus, I had approached one of the authors of it, Representative Manning out of North Carolina, and I thought it was a brilliant piece of legislation. I had some problems with the language on what you can say in testing our levels of free speech, even regarding religious freedom. And I said, can you make this bill anti-Semitism, addressing that, and anti-black racism at the same time. It's the same coin and two sides to that coin. We are facing an onslaught of anti-black racism. In the last bill that was passed for $1.2 trillion, they had removed the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office in the Longworth office building, which was simply a repository to receive resumes of young African Americans and other diverse candidates. That was eliminated. But there was silence when one of the leading candidates for the GOP was running, and Mr. DeSantis out of Florida. Then when there was talks of a book ban, there was silence. When the affirmative action was stricken and struck down over and against the interests of African Americans' inclusion and our progress, there was silence. And now we've seen another young man killed here in Chicago, shot at 96 times. Don't want to go into all the details of it, but there's been too much silence. And in Ohio, we need to start talking about anti-black racism and the laws that can be put on the books so that we're not excluded from contracts, we're not excluded from universities, and we have investments placed back in our neighborhood. So it's the same, we as a people and as a culture share so much with the Jewish community. I would like for us to be advocates of both anti-Semitism and anti-black racism.
Thank you for that. It brings me to, go on. Brings me to the question that as you began, I began thinking about. Taylor, when we first saw the protest and we saw the police get involved, we saw them arresting black students. Why is this an issue for black students?
Well, like I said, I want to note that quite a few of the organizers on our campus are black students because they share the same sentiment as I do with we can't have this history that we do and stand idle. But with that, it's an issue for black students in the sense that ultimately we will always end up being the target of police violence. And there have been on our campus, around the encampment, there have been 3 recent arrests. Not the students, however, which, as the university is making a point to not actively go into the encampment to arrest students. However, 3 black community members. And so we are, like this anti-black sentiment, we do want to put that out there because at the end of the day, oftentimes, if not all the time, Zionists are anti-black. And we're not only just fighting for Palestine, we're fighting for all of the people, everybody that is facing the repercussions of anti-Semitic and Zionist rhetoric. So.
And if I could add to what she's saying, is that that's the beauty of our culture. We are not victims. We've not taken on the mantle of and the burden of slavery and ever looked at ourselves as the victims of slavery. We have looked at ourselves as the survivors of slavery. If you have that shift in mentality, you become more resilient. You go forward. You're not looking for retribution. You're looking for ways for reconciliation. And that's at the heart of what makes us a beautiful people and a culture that has something to contribute to this conversation.
Indeed, we certainly understand being put upon because we've been more than anyone else put upon. So when there's a fight to happen, we should be part of that because people have stood with us in the same way. Let's take a break. Let's come back and talk about solutions and how we move forward. We'll be back right after this.
Thank you for joining us today. This is a wonderful program, and we hope that you're enjoying it. I ask that you go to rainbowpush.org and become a member and donate to the best of your ability. You know, this program costs, but could you imagine the cost without it? So we're asking for you to become a partner, to become a member of the Rainbow Push Coalition today and donate to the best of your ability. We're looking forward to providing you with more critical content for a time such as this. Go to rainbowpush.org or just scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen. And we'll see you next time at the Rainbow Push Coalition.
students' perspectives. And I think the congressman has given us a very eloquent way of the history of Zionism and where that came from. But if you go onto a college campus today and you ask 50 students what Zionism is, you're going to get 50 different answers. And so what we really need to be doing is understanding the perspective of students, because what is being said today, at least by these demonstrators across the country, is the fact that we are not anti-Semitic. We are not trying to push against just Jewish people altogether. But the form of Zionism that has lasted since the late 1890s now seems to be, as our good friend, Brother James Zogby, who is a Palestinian American, has mentioned, that the most extreme form of Zionism is that which has lasted and lives today. And that is the one that seeks to just expand westward and to grab all of this land and all of these resources only for these Jewish people and for no one else. There is no form of coexistence. There is no form, as it's been mentioned, for a two-state solution. And so we've got to be able to understand where we are right now and truly, again, hear these students. These are not protests that have just come up, as I've mentioned before, spur of the moment and willy-nilly, as my grandparents used to say. These are organizations. There are, first of all, Jewish students that are leading and organizing on these campuses as well. And they're understanding what Zionist means from their home state. But what they don't like is the fact that this Zionist state now is in a genocidal just rampage, and they don't agree with what's going on in their home country. That is a very real fact, that there are players in America on both sides of this, Jewish and Palestinians, that are calling for this stop in a genocide. So our solution, I think, is again doing what Rainbow Push has always known how to do: coalition build, bring everyone to the table, get everyone's perspective, and try to force a way for us to get to a solution that walks away with everyone happy from the table. What Reverend Jackson has been able to do for years, I still don't know it. I've been trying to find out. Is he comes to the table with certain different perspectives, but by the time he leaves the table, he's now gotten everyone on as close to the same page as they possibly can to have an actual solution that does not just make me happy, but makes both sides of the table happy, to be able to walk away with some kind of solution from that.
Okay, you may not understand what Reverend Jackson has done, but there's a gentleman sitting next to you who has lived this life, all of his life, right there in the shadows. So, Congressman, talk about what might be some actionable steps that students at the university, that the faculty can do to gain a greater sense of understanding.
This is the time that we need to have enlightened minds lead us so that we can see a pathway forward. My father has told me, Reverend Jesse Jackson, that peace is possible if you believe. We first have to identify the problem. Some people at the table don't believe in peace. That is why President Joe Biden has asked the Israeli people to please make a decision about Mr. Netanyahu. He is not seeking a peaceful conclusion. The second part, I would reference the scriptures of when I saw these students go into motion, and the children shall lead them. And this is a moment that is profound in reconciliation, where the lions and the lambs, people and animals and creatures that appear to be irreconcilable, that there is peace when they have something in common. So you look for what's in common, good-natured, and there are many great-natured people on both sides want to see reconciliation. They want to see a pathward forward. When I think about the 30th anniversary of Rwanda, they lost 1 million people, 800,000 people, in less than 100 days. This is their 30th anniversary. When President Kagame got in charge, he used the Rwandan Intelligence Service, which is now the 4th largest peacekeeping group in the United Nations, to arrest some 30,000 people that had committed that murder and genocide of 800,000 Rwandans. When I think of Mr. President Nelson Mandela, the jailed and the jailer received the Nobel Peace Prize at the same time, because he was not looking for retribution, he was looking for reconciliation. And they went through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What I would have liked to have seen happen starting on October 7th was the Israeli Defense Force, through their intelligence, started tracking down the people at Hamas and bring them before a tribunal, before a court. But going off and saying this is Hamas, who is Hamas, and killing anybody, anywhere, labeling him Hamas is not the solution. How do you know this is a Hamas fighter? How don't you know? People deserve to be brought in, and now you're killing children. And I tell you, the part that really disturbs me so much, if you were to stop the war today, right now, ceasefire, like I've always been a part, and you've seen 30,000+ people killed, and we don't know because Mr. Netanyahu won't let in the outside press. Over 200 correspondents have been killed, and he has excluded, this is unprecedented in modern war, that you can't have independent press people in there. You've had United Nations food workers killed. But if you were to stop the war today, and you were to see the 30,000+ children that are amputees and dealing with malnutrition and starvation, every 3 to 6 months you have to adjust a prosthetic on a child as they grow. You will have one of the largest populations of children that you have to put amputee and prosthetics on in the whole world. You'll have to build whole universities just around early childhood development to help children walk that have to get their brain recovered. So this level of inhumanity has to stop, and I applaud the young people around this nation that are fighting to stop it because they don't want these crimes continuing in their name.
It's heartbreaking. Let me, I gotta ask one more question of Taylor. So first of all, it's an honor to have you here, and thank you so much for what you're doing. How can we be supportive to you and what your efforts are as a community?
Yeah, so right now, honestly, the biggest thing that we're emphasizing on our campus as an organization is just having the numbers and having the people to support us. Just because even as the student organizers, we will admit that we don't know everything, and that having like the Rainbow Push Coalition support us, as well as other organizations across Chicago, kind of coming to our campus, like for our rallies and our protests and our general like programming, and having these faces and having these numbers and showing that it's just not us, because a lot of students on our campus seem to think that it's just us that care about this. Everybody cares about this. It's a Chicago-wide, nationwide, global issue, and it's a huge movement. And yeah, I mean, it's just honestly just having the people there to support us and having people share their knowledge and expertise is honestly the biggest way that you all can support us. So.
Thank you all. It's been great.